Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for spending another Thursday night with us here. I'm so excited to bring on my friend, Alvin Lee. Just gonna give him a second to join, and then we'll get started. But I hope everybody's having a great Thursday night. Here he is. He's connecting. Hi, Alvin.
Hey Arlene, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's pretty hot out here where I am today. It's like 90 something. And we don't have air conditioning in the bay, so
Oh, yeah, it's hot out here too. I'm down in SoCal, but it's so exciting to have you on
thank
our
you.
live stream. And I'm so excited to get to talk about all the work that you do. So, do you want to start off by telling us just a little bit about, um, I know you're a singer, you're also like a student activist. So, just all of those things combined into like a little introduction would be super cool.
Yeah. So I'll get right into it. So hey guys, my name's Alvin. I'm going to be a rising senior and I go to high school out in Fremont in the Bay. Uh, in the activism front, my main involvement is with Gen Up. So what Gen Up is we are a statewide kind of youth-led organization really focused on getting students engaged in education advocacy and education policy. So we have more than 78 chapters across California, and we really focus on organizing around a whole host of issues, be it schools and communities first, student board member advocacy. Recently, we've also really been pushing ethnic studies and AB 331. So there's a whole host of education policy issues that we're really involved in, and that's kind of a short rundown of Gen Up. In terms of me personally, I've also been really involved in music and singing specifically. So I've been involved in music since I was 10, so about 7 years and going strong, and I still do perform a lot, and I'm really involved in music as well. So those are like my two big interests. For a while I was like convinced that I wanted to be like a pro tennis player, but that dream quickly died when I realized like not that great.
That's
Reality
awesome.
hit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. But yeah, so you've been singing for 7 years? I didn't.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's awesome. So do you sing like inside of school, outside, or like where do you find that musical fulfillment?
Yeah, so I sing in a choir. So I mainly sing outside. I sang inside my school choir for 2 years, but then because of like scheduling issues, I couldn't continue it. But for all those 4 years, I've still been singing with my outside singing group.
Awesome. Well, yeah, so I wanted to ask you on to talk a little bit because I know you're, I call you like the education advocacy expert for student advocacy. And so, as you know, Ed Code, which is our education code that governs everything in California and all of our standards in schools, it actually mandates that students in grades K through 12 in public school be offered art in all five areas. So that's visual arts, dance, theater, media arts, and music. So I was kind of wondering a little bit because only 12% of schools met that mandate, and that was before coronavirus hit. So now we're looking at facing budget cuts and even more inequity. What are the things that you think we can do as students, as activists, to kind of get involved and contact maybe our school board members or our legislators?
Yeah, so Jennifer, we have like a great toolkit that really focuses on how to really advocate to your local school board. But to keep it really short and simple, you know, being really involved in the arts myself, like I can firsthand attest, like arts is really freaking crucial to education. And in a perfect world, like I think arts should be like I mean, it is a fundamental requirement, but I think like a deeper dive really into arts is so important. But I think in terms of how to really advocate, in our education system, the great thing about California is that our education system is super duper decentralized, and so a lot of that advocacy and that influence doesn't happen at a state level, but at a local level. And so I think the great thing about that is it's so much easier to have more intimate conversations with local elected leaders and your local school board members. And so what, be it arts education, be it any issue that you're super duper passionate about, advocating to your local school board is so, so important. And how do you do that? Super simple. Write an email, show up to board meetings, submit public comments. Now that it's COVID, everything's online. You don't need to drive up to the board meeting in person. You literally just go online, go on the district website and submit a digital comment. So now it's more than easy than ever it was to really engage in education policy advocacy. So I think, those are some really basic fundamentals to really how to make change in your local education system.
Yeah, yeah, and all that you're saying, it's like really fundamental for us to also like build those relationships with our local officials, and really understand like, okay, these people are on our side most of the time, hopefully, and are looking to make the best policy for us and what impacts us, and really helps us. So, what would you recommend? Like, how would you recommend that either students come together and go to board meetings, or like, because I know like a group of voices is more impactful than like an individual voice, and like what you're doing with Gen Up is so awesome because you guys have like a California branch, I guess, like the main branch, and then a bunch of different sub branches in different areas. So like how would you approach organizing for arts education, I guess, if you had to on the spot?
Yeah, I think the two basic things are submitting public comments and, setting up meetings with board members. So Arlene, too, you are literally an education advocacy god. As I'm sure a lot of the recurring audience knows, Arlene is one of the finalists for the student board member position on the California State Board of Education. And so Arlene's really involved in ed advocacy too. And I think, for at least from my experience, I think student voice is really great at cutting through the noise. There's, and Arlene, as you know too, I mean, there's so many different interests in the education system, right? Like we have a lot of different advocacy and interest group, be it teachers, be it, various different unions. But in my experience, like students have been the best at really cutting through all the noise and enacting real change. And so, if you're a student and arts education, arts organizing is something you're really passionate about, the two best ways to approach it would be showing up at your public comment, board meeting and submitting public comments, and emailing and reaching out to your board president and your local board members and looking like, hey, look, this is an issue I'm really passionate about. Can I work with you to either lobby you to vote this way, or, I want to get this on the board agenda, or I want to pass a resolution for the district in support of more arts education. Would you work with me on this?
Yeah, and I think that's super fundamental, and it's also really clear now that I'm like looking at it. It's like really a two-step system, and then just going from there after and seeing what more you need to do.
Right.
So we are in voting season. It is almost time to vote. There was less than 100 days before we vote, and I know like you're super involved with the Schools and Communities First Act, Proposition 15. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and your work with that. And honestly, I believe that's one of the steps that we can take to getting more funding for arts education. So yeah, if you just want to say a little bit about that.
Yeah. Awesome. So, Gen Up is chairing and facilitating a statewide youth coalition around this ballot measure. So we've been organizing for Schools and Communities First for a while now, and what it does is it's probably, I would argue, like the most important thing California voters are probably going to vote on in the 2020 ballot in terms of a direct effect on our own lives. But what Schools and Communities First is it's a ballot measure that essentially overturns a very old, outdated property tax loophole. And so the best way to think about it is it's really going after and taxing wealthy corporations and making sure that these wealthy corporations are paying their fair share of property taxes. And it protects private homeowners like our parents, it protects small businesses, small farmers. And so it's really, really going after a lot of these large companies who haven't been paying their fair shares for a while. And so it's a big coalition of a bunch of awesome, really social justice involved orgs, like the ACLU, like the League of Women's Voters, that are really doing a lot of work pioneering it. If SCF passes in 2020 of this year, it's estimated to generate back about $12 billion in revenue for schools and local county governments annually. So it'll be a really important step forward in terms of properly funding California's education system.
Yeah, and I think that's that's really inspiring to think about, especially with the census and like everything that's happening right now. How can we think about what our communities will look like when they're properly funded and when everybody has access to all of the things that are necessary, quite honestly, because we think of art as like this really nice thing, like this extra, like a side to your
Right.
main meal, I guess. When it's I don't know, I love mac and cheese when I eat chicken. It's sometimes mac and cheese is my whole meal, so sometimes the arts are my whole meal. I don't know where I'm
Right.
going with this metaphor, but it's super super crucial. And so now I want to go back to your singing. So I just want to hear a little bit about like, how did you get started in that? How did you find it? And maybe, this is a sustained passion. You're going on 7 years, almost 8 years singing. So, what kept you going and what kept you there?
Yeah, so um I started music about 8 years ago when I was first part of my local choir. And then from there, I kind of got a lot more involved, and I started doing a bit more solo singing and participating in different competitions. And then when I got much more seriously engaged, I started participating in more serious competitive troops. So that was kind of the journey. But I think for me, I mean, like most folks, like even with you with arts and the artistic expression, I think music and all forms of art is a great way of expressing yourself. And um, I don't know what it is, man. It's just it's a great thing to do. And I think something that's so powerful about music, it's I think it's like almost like a way of communicating amongst people without having to use or say anything. It's like an unknown connection that we all feel, and I think music is a great way to really bring folks together.
Yeah, no, I
Mhm.
definitely agree. I always I know it's like cliche of like a picture is worth 1,000 words and all of these things. But art is really like a universal language. Like there's almost this unsaid connection between like you, the experiencer of the art, and maybe like a producer of the art, or even the art itself. Like when you go to a museum and you're like, oh my
Mhm.
God, this thing is amazing. Somebody just said Alvin has an amazing voice, so I'll take your word on that. But yes, so I wanted to talk a little bit about um, when we're in school, we kind of have trouble. I don't know. School gets boring sometimes, I think, at least for me, and I know for a lot of my peers. We have trouble like retaining attention, and especially now that we're going online. And with an arts education, you're actually 5 times more likely to stay in school. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit of like, what do you think, like in your ideal world, that schools should look like, and how school days should be structured, especially as like a student activist and you're seeing all these needs in your communities. Kind of what would a fulfillment of that look like?
Yeah, so I think even with the recent advocacy that we've been kind of working together on in ethnic studies, like I think we all agree that there's so many things in our education system that's very outdated. As a lot of folks know, our education system was kind of built during the Industrial Revolution, right? So that was really our education system was designed in a way to really kind of churn out students like robots, and not really in a way where we're really promoting a lot of that creative and individualistic expression. So I think wow, there's a lot of places we could start. So the first thing would be, making arts a mandated, I think, course requirement, not just, as like a half a semester, as a one semester, but, as I think a course that folks should be taking out through all 4 years of high school. It doesn't really have to be a specific form of art. I think any form of expressive art is a great course to take, but I think having that foundation is great. And even just beyond arts education, right? Like, and I think another important one is civics education, right? Like, like the lack of voting is a big issue. And, I think all of us agree that there's so many issues, with the government, with our society that we really need to fix, but we live in democracy and you can't fix a lot of these things without using your vote because that is your voice. And I think there's, a lot of disconnect with students in terms of like really understanding the full scope of like how our education system works and like a lot of the different political bodies. Like I remember there was a poll that XQ put out that showed like only 5% of people voted for their school board members, But, like school board members literally control your education, my education. The fact that like a lot of folks don't even know what it does, I think is a very scary thing. So I think like civics education is a great example. I think better history curriculum that's more inclusive of all races, so ethnic studies, I think is very, very important as well. So I think there's a lot of different things that can be improved on.
Yeah, yeah, and even thinking about how we're talking about art requirements. So like A through G requires that you take 1 year of performing or visual arts. And I have friends who live in low income areas or areas that are being underserved, and they don't have access to that one class. So they either can't graduate, can't get into college, or have to look for fulfillment like outside of school, like have to seek out community college classes, or seek out community resources that might fulfill those requirements. But I think that we're underserving our communities in a systematic way, and it's just not cool, not great. And definitely the first step is civic engagement, but also like reaching out to the people who directly serve you, like your school board members, your legislative officials, people like that. And they're honestly really receiving, I think. And like from the experience that I have, they're pretty nice. They're pretty willing to meet with you. So I guess what would be your advice? I know your first steps are like, okay, send a public comment, but how would you recommend students like sustaining that relationship?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like most, elected officials, like they don't have, or at least I mean, that's not true, but I think most school board members, sorry, don't have like evil intentions, right? Like a lot of them do run for the position because they are truly passionate about education. Where I do think there's a big issue is like there's a big disconnect between the lived experiences of students and the experiences of adults and the school board members who are making those decisions that directly impact us. So I think one thing that Arlene, I'm sure you could second me on too, in your involvement too, is like they're usually super duper receptive to students. Whenever like students reach out, like they're more than usually willing to listen, and a lot of times they'll really prioritize student voice and student perspective more so than our parents and the adults. So I think in terms of how to maintain that consistent communication follow-up, I mean, just on a whole host of different issues, like just make sure your voice is heard and make sure you're sharing your thoughts and perspectives to your school board. And I think if you're that kid that's like always speaking at board meetings, submitting public comments, like they are going to remember you and you're going to build a gradual relationship from there. But I think the bottom line is like at the end of the day, school board members do recognize that their biggest constituents are the students. And I think that they understand how important it is to listen to students. So we just need to speak up and tell them what we want.
Yeah, definitely. No, I can totally second that. I just had a meeting with somebody who's a legislative official under Gavin Newsom's office. And she was like, I take every meeting with students. Like every meeting that a student will propose, I'll take it, because I know that they are the ones on the front lines and directly experiencing life and education and our education system. So I need to hear their voices. And I was like, that's awesome, because I know sometimes it's hard to get meetings with important people. But yeah, whoever's watching, like, your voice matters and your voice is important for sure. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit about, your school board members, and the ed code that actually mandates that you have a school board member, because I know you're doing all this work with CSBMA. Right. Okay. I was like,
yeah.
And yeah, and how students can get their voice heard in that way.
Right. Yeah, so one big initiative for Janet for a while now has been the California Student Board Member Association. So, as you know, Arlene Brenna, I guess she's termed out now, but the former state student board member, along with Zach, who's the San Diego student board member, us three, we worked really close together to kind of put the foundations of this organization together. And the California Student Board Member Association has like a very simple goal. It's essentially a union for student board members. And the idea is that if you're bringing student board members from across California together, you're really centering their power and their voices. And that could be really, really powerful. So CSBMA has a network of more than 50 or 60 student board members from across California now, and it includes some of the largest districts. So we have LAUSD, we have SDUSD, we have San Francisco, Fresno, etc. And so I think with CSBMA, a big part is really just empowering and advancing student voice and student perspective. And I know another big campaign of CSBMA too is actually getting students onto school boards. So for a lot of folks that don't know, there's actually a bill that State Superintendent Thurmond, when he was still in the legislature, passed called AB 261. And it basically states that, if you live in a school district that has at least one high school and there currently is not a student board member in your district, you can actually start a petition. And if I think it was like more than like 500 people in your district sign that petition and you submit it to the school board, they're legally obligated within 60 days to create a student position on the school board. So I know that's a big facet that CSBMA has really worked on as well. So the purpose is to really empower student board members, because the idea is that if the student board members are representatives on the board, by giving them better tools to represent us, we're also, directly empowering our direct influence and say in our own education.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's such an avenue to get, these issues heard, whether it be about like civic engagement, whether it be about arts education, ethnic studies. It's so powerful to be represented by somebody who's the same age as you,
right.
Who's going through the same thing as you. Like I see Brenna on the state board and I'm like, she went through college apps and she represented all of California students. So like it helps me feel seen. So yeah, I think that's super cool, all the work that you do there, and help connect people also to their student leaders too, to build that relationship as well. So I guess what I would like to ask is if you could leave all of our student leaders, all of our education advocates, all of our arts education activists with one piece of advice to empower them and empower their voices, what would it be?
I think the most important thing is never, okay, this sounds cliche, and I know we hear adults say it all the time, but I think it's true. Like, never be afraid to let your voice be heard, right? And it doesn't matter in which situation it is, you always need to express yourself and express your perspective, and be willing to put yourself out there and advocate. Because I think if we have had a lot more advocates, in our education system, but in other issues, I think our education system would be in a much better place than it is now. So I think, if anything, the biggest takeaway should be never be afraid to let your voice be heard, and never be afraid, or understand that students hold so much influence and power in our education system, and anything that comes out from a student's mouth and student perspective is, I would argue, so much more powerful than what other folks can say when it comes to education. So, as students, we need to make sure that we're really expressing ourselves, letting our voices be heard, and really ensuring that we're really just putting ourselves out there. Because I think if students speak up, change will come in the education system. And I think that's been demonstrated in a lot of the most recent issues, happening around the state, like ethnic studies and a whole host of other things.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is like your lived experience, so claim it, and do whatever you deem necessary. Like I have friends who started petitions and went to their principals to get classes, people who are trying to pass policies and different things like that. So it's super inspiring to have you on, Alvin, and to hear all of this wisdom. Somebody said inspiring with 2 flame emojis, so true. So thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me.
Yeah, thank you so much to you too, Arlene, for having me, and really happy to be on a guest for Create California.
Yeah, thank you. And for everybody watching, we're actually raising awareness about the issue, about arts education, and we need people to join our campaign so that when there's opportunities to take action, we can alert you. And we actually have a pledge out to protect arts education. And you can sign it at createca.org. But thank you so much, Alvin, for being on today and spending some time with me on this live.
Thank you so much, Arlene.
All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Yep, you too. Bye.